Hi there, I am your host, Dancing Johari, and welcome to my channel. It's May, it's warm, and well, you know what that means. We have a mermaid project to do, and the month's already half gone. We better get started on it. Why don't you come along for the ride? To the workstation! I don't really do concept art, but I wanted to do a manly merman rather than a mermaid. I did a lot of mermaids last year, so let's add a guy to the mix. Merman come in all shapes, sizes, and well, I'm really feeling an orca vibe this time. I wanted to do a mammal type merman or mermaid or merperson. So let's see what's in my project box, shall we? Deuce Gorgon. I got this doll in a lot from eBay that was listed as 4 parts. And well, we need to do some work on this guy. He's missing a leg, so he's a perfect volunteer. So let's start with taking off his legs, or what's left of them. Next, we're going to take off his cap and his mohawk. For this, I had to take out the demolition kit, the big guns. Okay, they're pliers mostly, but you get my meaning. Using my pliers, I take out the mohawk first. There we go. Next, I do my best to get the edges up and, well, the glue is really adhered really well, but it is lifting a little bit around the corners. So let's use my X-Acto blade, and without cutting, let's just gently lift stuff up until I can get my fingers underneath. Let's see that one more time.
So like on a personal level, I love the hell out of this.
Okay, well, I also had to push down his head a little bit, but he's in great shape. I really like the look of the tat, but I don't like the particular subject matter of the tattoo. So we're going to maybe change that. But first, let's take out a soft file and take off all the shininess, and let's just take off the tattoo while we're at it. This will help the super clear to stick later, and well, it'll also help if we decide to do any painting. His skin is really light, and I want more of a tan skin vibe, I think. Next, let's take off his face. So taking out my pure acetone that I got from Sally's. I take out just some wipes, lint-free wipes, and then I use Q-tips to get anything that it missed. Then I wipe everything down one more time just to make sure there's no factory paint left. Once he's nice and clean, it's time to get out the Dremel. We're gonna have to do a little extra modification for the next part. If you've watched my mermaid series, you know where this is going, but for those of you that don't, I usually take off the crotch, or at least most of the crotch area, and a good portion of the back. It just helps the mermaid or merman to sit better. Not that they sit very easily anyway, they still have to kind of be propped up. Taking my time, I just keep sawing through until the pieces I don't want come off. I also remove any excess parts of the joints. Next, going in line with the spine, I make a hole using my Dremel, and then I widen the hole with another bit. Once it's to the point where the coupling will go in, I go ahead and make my armature using my Jeton pliers. I put the coupling that's going to go in and attach the armature to that. And I get my hot glue gun, fill the hole with hot glue, and stick it in. Now this isn't the only thing I'm going to do to this. Once it's nice and hard and cooled, I get out epoxy sculpts. I mix it 50-50, and unfortunately I was out of gloves this day. Please use gloves when mixing this stuff. You don't want this stuff to get stuck in your skin. It can cause an allergy. Next, I take snakes of epoxy and firmly and permanently make sure that the armature is not coming out. Then, since I have extras mixed up, I go ahead and just use it to fill in the head. You can also use air dry clay for this too. Using water, I smooth everything down and put everything aside to dry or cure. It takes about 6 hours for the epoxy sculpt to cure. It is a resin, so it takes a little time. Once it's all cured, it's time for batting. So getting out strips of quilt batting that I've cut. You can get quilt batting at any hobby store. I go ahead and wrap it around the armature, then secure it in place with hot glue. It doesn't take much, just a couple strips, honestly, for me. Then I trace out and cut out this fin shape. Now, this is actually a fluke shape. This is for the Orca fluke. And since that would have cartilage in it, it's not going to be flimsy like a fin would. So it needs to have some sturdiness to it. So it's time to break out EVA foam and cut out 2 pieces. I did consider doing a dorsal fin too, but I ended up scrapping that later. Next, I'm going to hot glue this onto the end of the armature and batting and sandwich it around it. And we're going to wait for that to cool and trim off any excess that doesn't quite match. There we go. Next, I took some acrylic paint and in white and just painted just the top part of the sandwich. We don't want it to be able to be seen through the material. Taking performance fabric in white and black, I cut out 2 pieces in the body and fluke shape that I want. Pin it around. First fluke shape first, then around the sides. Next, I start sewing using a ladder stitch, which makes it look like a nice clean seam. And I go down one side, all the way down the fluke, and around. Yes, I changed my thread quite often. I just knotted it on the inside where you wouldn't see. Now I'm going around the edge of the fluke. And then once that's done, I went up the other side. Then I hot glued the top of the material in place and covered the transition in snakes of epoxy sculpt and thinned it. Well, I smoothed it out, sculpted it, and I even gave him a belly button using a pin. I used the rounded edge of the pin and just had some fun sculpting a new belly button. Once everything was cured again, I go ahead and take out my airbrush, and using primer, I go ahead and spray it, prime the epoxy sculpt. Then I began painting the epoxy sculpt and the fabric with black acrylic paint, airbrush paint. For this, we're gonna, since they don't have a solid stripe going all the way down through their fluke, I go ahead and create panels, basically of white. And I also cover the seams so that you can't see the thread, you can't see, the transition. It's just looks really nice that way. Then I covered the white parts with white acrylic paint and covered up any spots that I didn't want. Once that was all done, I gave him 2 coats of Mr. Super Clear outside, broke out some tan oil-free foundation powder, and I started blushing the body. It took 2 coats to get the color that I wanted. And then I just matched acrylic paint to miniature acrylic paint to the skin tone and painted his scalp. After another coat or 2 of Mr. Super Clear, I began blushing the body with tans and pinks just to bring more life into the living plastic. Alright, well, just to make some life into the plastic. I also began blushing his face and his lips, particularly, and around his eyes. We don't want him to look like he's wearing eyeshadow, but we do want him to look, like he's got a little bit of a tan going on. Then I continued to blush. After another coat of Mr. Super Clear, I began building up the color on his lips a little bit more. Again, I tried to keep it not sparkly so it wouldn't look like lipstick, but I want it to look natural. And natural is not, you know, flesh colored. Their lips tend to be a kind of, usually a shade of pink, depending on your skin tone. In this case, we're going for a bit of a pink-ish color, but not too dark, not too heavy. Then I broke out my watercolor pencils and started adding more details. I began sketching out the shapes of the eyes. And well, keep a kneaded eraser handy for this part. I had to reframe the eye shape a couple times. I also used a flesh color pencil for the waterline. And I think I ended up switching to a pink later. For the eyes, I wanted to have a predatory look and a not quite human look, so I used yellow for the iris color. And I also gave it, using black, I also gave him some folds above the eye, which we have little creases up there. I whitened the sclera. Then I began marking out the shapes of his eyebrows. Now, I was watching a lot of X-Men, the animated series, this particular day. So I was feeling a very Charles Xavier vibe when it came to his eyebrows, so I tried my best to match the animated series eyebrow shape for Charles Xavier. What can I say? I love X-Men. I love superheroes. And it's kind of fun to just take some things that you like and just put it into it all, add it to it all of your own creation. I drew the pupils, and I started sketching out the hair color shapes. We're going to be painting those in later. Darken the nostrils after another coat of Mr. Super Clear, and just kept working on building up color. I used red for the corners of the eyes to help give it a little bit of depth and help to make them look a little bit more real. I also used it for the waterline, but the flesh tone was just not showing up. When you have trouble building up colors, it's time to add another coat of Mr. Super Clear. I also drew in the shapes of the eyelashes. I was trying to keep them short and not too girly, but a couple people still thought they looked a little girly anyway. Next, I really wanted to give him some tribal tattoos. Now, I didn't want to do any particular tribal. He's an Orca. He wouldn't necessarily have Polynesian or Samoan or any of those cultures type tattoos. So I just looked up some tribal tattoos that I liked and did my best to emulate it. These are the tattoos I was inspired by. I did them on the wrong shoulders though. Oops. Tattooing no. It's supposed to flow towards the body, away from the body, I think. But, you know, I did my best, and honestly, I really liked how each one came out. On his left arm, I got a little more tattoo heavy. On his right arm, I didn't do quite as many. Next, we're going to put in his nipples. And then after another coat of Mr. Super Clear, I was really having trouble building up color, so I switched to gouache paint to give it a really good bright pop. This also helps to add details a little bit faster. I darkened up his eyebrows while I waited for the irises to dry. Whiten the scleras. I also use gray, a little bit of gray at the top with a watercolor pencil. I just lift it off with a little bit of water from the brush. It really helps to give it a little bit of depth. Darkened up his, well, I don't want to call it eyeliner because I'm trying to keep him looking natural, but, you know, it still kind of comes out looking like eyeliner, but that's okay. He could be a goth guy. He looks very warrior-esque, almost like he's wearing war paint. Almost. I used a watercolor pencil to darken his eyelashes a little bit and around the edges of the eye, I just wet it down a little. Add another shade of yellow to the top and bottom, and a little bit of detail with white to the irises. Sorry, I think I had my light a little too bright again. So it's not quite picking up all the different colors that went into his eye, but they still came out looking pretty cool. It's one of those you have to trust the process. With white, I go ahead and add some highlights to the creases, the eyelashes, and his eyebrows. Also around the corners, under the eyebrows, and over his lip, I use a white watercolor pencil. Then I painted in his pupils again. And then after another coat, I decided to refine the eyelashes. So this is after another coat of Mr. Super Clear. The good thing about after it's dry, in between each layer, about adding the next layer of Mr. Super Clear is it saves your work, because gouache is like a watercolor paint. It can be reactivated later by more water, so you want to save your work. It's kind of like saving in another layer of Photoshop. At this point, I decided to do 2 more tattoos on him. I ended up doing a chest tattoo on him later off camera. And because at this point I didn't want to use another coat of Mr. Super Clear, I broke out acrylic paints. The gouache was just not showing up at this point very well. It kept breaking up because I had to, it had dried out, so I had to add more water to it. And that's kind of a risk sometimes. So at this point, I'm trying to use gouache and going, wait a minute, why is this? It's kind of looking good, but kind of breaking up a little bit. And that's where the acrylics came out. This is a model paint that dries pretty flat. I believe it's an airbrush Vallejo, or the Army Painter miniature paints. Both are good. And I use that to refine and to thicken my line work. Tribal tattoos, they tend to have very thick line work. For the, I don't mean for traditional Polynesian, or I'm talking tribal tattoos as in you go in and you say, I want a tribal tattoo. It looks like tribal braid work. I also went ahead and finished the eyelashes and the edges of the of his eyes with darker acrylics. I added another tattoo that represented water in his other forearm and wrote Orca's rule on his fingers. So on his right hand, he has Orca's on every finger and his thumb, and then rule is on the left hand fingers. Once that's all dry and you've done another couple coats with Mr. Super Clear, it's time to add glossy varnish to the eyes. Just to give him a pop, a little bit of shininess. It helps to bring them to life. Next, he needs an accessory. We need a trident, and I've never made an official trident. So, but he is a merman. He's going to need one. So using jewelry wire, I twisted it into a fork-ish shape, put it into the end of a paper straw, and then secured it in place with snakes of epoxy and started sculpting. I originally wanted it to look like it was forged metal, but since I couldn't get it quite the way to look like it was forged metal, I decided to make it look rougher and like it was made out of sea coral. I figured, you know, there's volcanoes and stuff, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to refine metals per se under the sea. So why not go with a more coral look? Added another snake to make it kind of at the where it attaches to make a nice smoother transition, and then added a counterweight with the last of the epoxy sculpt at the end. Next, breaking out my Elmers Glue all, I took leftover fluff from previously made hair wefts in black and started using them. They could still be used, they just could make a very messy weft. So rather than making a bunch of hair wefts, I took some leftover white hair wefts and the leftover black fluff and started gluing it straight onto the head up until about the crown area. I wanted to have a mohawk instead of a dorsal fin. And well, I just took bits of that same black, loosely braided them for the sides, and did the same with some white yarn that I created wefts from, and loosely braided those as well, and just glued them onto the scalp, and then trimmed the ends in the front. Next, we're going to make some actual hair wefts out of this same black yarn fluff. And then we're going to take the wefts, I kind of curled them in on themselves, and then glued them directly to the middle of the scalp. And shape. Once it's all dry, I shape them, and it comes out looking a lot like a dorsal fin. Next, I take out my carving tools, and since the trident is finally finished curing, I'm going ahead and sculpted it a little bit more to look a little bit more like corally rock, and started to paint it with acrylic paint. I used turquoise and brown for the staff. Sorry this project took so long, but I was sick during most of this. Meet Alpha. I wanted him to have a strong warrior name, and Alpha just seems to fit. Plus, he's an apex predator. Why not? I hope you enjoyed his creation. He was a lot of fun to make. I hope you enjoyed this video and how I created Alpha, and I hope this is something that you make as well. It's always a great day to go out and do some crafting, and don't forget to go outside and get a little sun and exercise too. It's beautiful out today. Anyway, thank you for watching my channel, and thank you so much to everyone who has subscribed. Please join my Patreon if you would like. It's like the tip jar of the internet. What will you create today? Stay safe, and I hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye.